This is the living room. All the photographs were taken before the furniture was added. There is a small courtyard in the house, and this is the courtyard. This is taken from the kitchen, and what you see on the right hand side is the door to the toilet. And this is another house which has come up in Tamil Nadu in a remote village. It is called Mangala Heritage Home. The small courtyard before you get into the backyard was where the toilets were, which we demolished. What I am trying to talk is about how important or where a lot of compromises are made, how important is, how wide a field is conservation. It cannot survive just with purely with architectural knowledge. You need a wide experience, wide knowledge. When I passed out, when I took my master's degree in conservation in 1987, there were only very few people who have a formal degree in conservation or practicing conservation. Practicing was much less, and there were no projects. And most of the projects which I did in the initial stages of my career became reports. The work was carried out 10 years later or 12 years later, 15 years later. So all these things have happened, but now the situation has changed. So there is tremendous scope for conservation. The fact that I do new buildings, 50% of my project is new buildings, is the experience I gained in conservation. It's helping me quite a bit because we were taught very clearly how to do a new building in an old setting, historical context. So that has helped quite a bit in trying to do many of the new projects that we are doing. When you work on a project, there are a lot of compromises to be made. You will have a lot of idealism when you pass out, but when you actually enter the field, most of the idealism will be lost because the clients come and tell certain things. The developers will come and tell certain things. If you don't listen to them, you might lose the project. It's very, very difficult to keep the idealism, but I will say that a proper balance is required to be successful in the career. If you don't have a proper balance, if you make a lot of compromises, you will never reach anywhere. And you have to make the right kind of compromises in the right kind of way, which will help you to achieve greater success. One of the issues which faced when I did my masters in UK, you have to understand that I did it in 1987. The question which haunted my mind was, how can we talk about conservation in a poor country like India? So many people without houses, when there is not enough drinking water for people, when there are not enough toilets for most of the majority of the section. The way conservation at that time, quite a bit, the way conservation was practiced in UK is a picturesque conservation. They try to make the historic settings very beautiful, which I found to be very, very difficult to get it done in India at that time. I'm talking about 1987. So I decided that if I do a project in India, it is never going to happen. So throughout the master's course, I was trying to find an answer, and I discussed with various people in UK, my teachers and my colleagues and things, and they were talking about various experiments which has happened all over the world. At that time, the word which was used was integrated conservation, which was a kind of thing which used to happen in Italy. In UK it was more of a conservation, and if you have a conservation in a place, that gentrification happens, the poor people move out of the area, and it becomes a rich people's paradise kind of thing. So this was what was happening in UK. But in Italy, there were experiments where they tried to look at avoid gentrification. That means the people who used to live in the area continued to live in that same area after conservation. So it was known as integrated conservation. And I tried to look at many of these things. What I wrote, my thesis title was Taking Conservation to the People. an approach to conservation and development. This was the title of my master's thesis, because I told my director very clearly that unless I am able to answer these questions, my practice in India will not be of success. I'll be like an armchair conservationist where you just talk about it or you just do reports, and that is what is going to happen. So the inquiry which I did it at that time, which is now a lot of people have written, I mean things have changed quite a bit since for the last 37 years or 40 years, is to look at heritage as a tool for development. Can heritage be used as a tool for development? I'm trying to answer this question which I faced or I raised or for the first time in 1986 when I did my master's in conservation. So I will not say that I found an answer, but that inquiry which I raised that question in 1986, I'm still trying to find answers in different ways. So the presentation as a whole, can it lead to development? I'm just showing a house which we have restored, I mean less than 2 years ago. This building was in absolutely bad shape. There were no toilets in the building. It was the residence of a rich landlord. I mean, this building in central Travancore or the southern Kerala or the central Kerala. This house is located, typical thing, no masonry walls, because one of the traditional methods of construction, Kerala traditional architecture is only with timber walls. Client wanted to restore this building for his personal use. In fact, it was by a managing director of a multinational company. He's from the family, but the house has gone to some other members of the family and they wanted to sell it. He said, I remember this house as a child, and he no longer lives in Kerala. So he has worked outside Kerala all these years. So he said, I would like to buy the house and use it as my retirement house or somewhere where I go to Kerala, I want to stay. Can you help me with the restoration or the conservation of the house? This is after restoration which has happened. And the building inside also we had to add a kitchen, but only with timber walls. We had to add toilets, only with timber walls. So we added all those facilities. And we wanted to use the conservation principles of minimum damage or everything should be reversible. We try to keep it. And why conservation is important? If you don't have toilets, you can add toilets. If it doesn't have natural light, you can have windows. So conservation is very positive. But the conventional engineers and architects who are not trained in conservation doesn't know how to approach this issue. So general answer is tending to demolish the structure. So anybody, if they ask, I mean this cannot be retained, this is very difficult to repair, it's costly to repair. My general rule which I can't say, if the roof and the foundation is reasonably in good condition, and then it is cheaper to conserve the building. Because finally everything boils down to the economics. You can't tell a person who wants to tell him that please, this is a very important heritage structure, please conserve it for the posterity. And for him it's finally the economics which matters. So this is the living room. All the photographs were taken before the furniture was added. There is a small courtyard in the house, and this is the courtyard. This is taken from the kitchen, and what you see on the right hand side is the door to the toilet. And this is a small veranda, not of much use. All four sides, this was the typical veranda construction of a Naligat or a typical Taravada, which is there. What we have put is the Athangudi tiles. And I'm just showing some before and after pictures how the courtyard was there, which we have broken that masonry, which has been definitely might have been added at a much later period. This is the carving on the front door. We did not damage or try to do too much work on the front door because if we try to, sand it and try to make, you see, the objective of conservation is not to make the building look new. It is a historic building or it's an old building, and whatever of the original, you need minimum alterations. Whatever the original, you try to keep it For example, in this thing, you can see some of the timber is damaged. We try to replace the minimum timber numbers. The general tendency for the contractors who are executing the work is to replace to the maximum because they find it easier and they make more money when they replace it more. And trying to replace the minimum is not very easy things to replace the minimum pieces. So this is one of the drawbacks, I mean, you have to say that. So anything more than 50% damage, we make a detailed assessment. I mean, my engineers and architects in my team goes and assess the site. I mean, I don't do for the buildings for the last few years because it is very, very difficult. The tendency of the traditional craftsman is to replace slightly down. They don't know the scientific aspects. They don't know the conservation guidelines. But they know the craft very well, so that has to be taken into account. So this is the ceiling numbers, how we try to replace the minimum thing, and it's a work which is done outside, and we do work in various places. Although mostly in South India, we do projects in other states as well, where we can manage, but with the help of the client or the engineers, and it is quite possible to do the work. Now, that was a private residence which was conserved. The client is staying in that house on vacations. And this is another house which has come up in Tamil Nadu in a remote village. It is called Mangala Heritage Home. And this house, which we conserved about 10 years or 12 years ago, I don't remember when it was. And it was a typical Tamil Nadu small courtyard house. No toilets attached to the bedrooms. We added toilets to the bedroom. Very small rooms, narrow rooms. So we see, if the rooms are small, combine two rooms into a bigger room, because there is nothing which prevents you from combining two rooms. Of course, there will be some inconvenience, like for example in this house, the bedrooms were very narrow. I think they were 8.5 feet in width. So that is the old house that was there. We continue to make, I mean, there is nothing. I've gone and stayed in heritage homes where the bedrooms were very small. And this is a new addition which we have made to the same house, because in the existing house we could add only 3 bedrooms. Nobody stays there permanently, they rent out the place. I think they charge 3,500 rupees per room or something. And I asked the owner, are you making money on this? He said, at least I've saved the building and I'm able to break even. I mean, because he has put a couple who cooks for the guests, and he has put a manager, small manager kind of person who takes care of the thing or buys the thing. So with this 3 staff and everything, he says I'm able to manage. So we added some 2 bedrooms at the back to make it a little bit economically viable. So 5 bedrooms, but at the same time we try to build the same kind of joinery details and tiles and everything was used, even in the extension. So when somebody comes, they might not see, I mean, the kitchen was added in the new block. What you see is the left hand side is the kitchen and the right hand side is the dining, and this is the old courtyard which we kept. I mean, we did not try to do, I mean, one of the principles in conservation is not to do unsympathetic changes. So, I mean, a lot of open spaces in the courtyard. I mean, both the west and east side were open, so 3 sides were open spaces, but we try to keep it as it is. There was veranda in the front as well as at the back. We kept all those things as it is and tried to keep this thing, because that is the character of the typical Tamil Nadu, a small courtyard. Before you get into the backyard was where the toilets were, which we demolished and constructed the new block. I mean, they used to have some plants and a well outside, which we have kept as it is. And that is what we have done. So these 2 projects tell very clearly that even in a remote place, with the proper intervention, one might be able to make a project economically viable. The way you approach the project, the way you put it across is what matters. And I can say that compared with, I passed out 34 years ago, compared with that time and now, there is tremendous scope for conservation in the present day.